Right before my son's wedding, his fiancée threatened me. "Give me that $100,000 necklace you're wearing, or I'll tell Sam you tried to force me to have an abortion." I calmly smiled and agreed, took out my phone, and arranged an appointment. She arrived with a triumphant smile, but when she saw the guest I had invited, she screamed in terror. She was expecting a priceless heirloom to fund a life of luxury, but what she got was the cold, hard truth and a perfectly orchestrated, sweet revenge. My name is Eleanor Vance, and this year I turned 66. I live in a quaint old brownstone townhouse in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. If my story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. October in Boston has a kind of melancholy, poetic beauty to it. The maple leaves along Commonwealth Avenue had already turned a deep crimson and brilliant gold, and they drift down onto the brick sidewalks, rustling under the feet of people passing by. I've always loved this time of year. The crisp air carries the scent of oak and damp earth, just enough to make you want to wrap yourself in a cashmere scarf and sit by the window with a hot cup of Earl Grey tea. My brownstone here in Back Bay, the one where I lived with my late husband, Arthur, and raised our only son, Samuel, seemed to breathe a little slower, a little more peacefully on autumn days like these. My life, at 66, had settled into a neat and quiet rhythm. My antique art and jewelry gallery over on Newbury Street is still my greatest passion. It's a place where I can lose myself in the stories of the past, in the timeless beauty of objects crafted with heart and soul. Each piece is a legacy, a fragment of a memory. I don't just sell them, I feel like I'm a caretaker of their stories. Arthur, my husband, who was a brilliant history professor, taught me how to look at an object and see an entire era. It's been 5 years since he passed, but his presence is still here, in the neatly arranged books on the shelves, in the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner of the living room, and in Samuel's eyes. Samuel, or Sam, as I've always called him, is my whole world. At 38, he's a successful history professor at Boston University, a perfect continuation of his father's intellectual legacy. He's smart, he's kind, with a heart of gold, but that very kindness is sometimes his Achilles heel. Sam always sees the best in people, which is a noble quality, but a risky one in a world that isn't always so kind. After a few relationships that didn't work out, he grew more cautious, and I, as a mother, both worried about his loneliness and quietly hoped he'd find a woman who deserved him, someone who could see and treasure my son's precious soul. That Sunday afternoon started just like any other. I was in the library, my tortoiseshell glasses perched on my nose, meticulously examining an Edwardian-era emerald brooch through a magnifying glass. The slanted afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the tiny golden dust motes dancing in the air. The silence was broken only by the doorbell. I was a little surprised. Sam usually calls before coming over. I went to the door, and there was my son, the smile on his face a little strained, not as natural as usual. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice a tad higher than normal, and then he stepped aside, revealing a young woman standing slightly behind him. "Mom, this is Tiffany Rose. Tiffany, this is my mother, Eleanor Vance." I looked at the young woman. Tiffany, a name that sounded like crystal bells. She was, indeed, very beautiful, in a very modern way. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her blue eyes were sharp and intelligent, and a radiant smile showed off a set of perfectly white teeth. She wore a fitted Burberry trench coat and carried a designer handbag that I knew cost enough to buy a small Louis XVI piece of furniture. She extended her hand, a manicured hand with a perfect French manicure. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance. Sam has told me so much about you." Her voice, like her appearance, was sweet and carefully polished, but when I took her hand, I felt a cool indifference, a handshake that used only the tips of her fingers. Her eyes met mine, but I got the feeling they weren't truly seeing me. They were glancing over my shoulder, scanning the room behind me with the lightning-fast appraisal of a professional. My Samuel has always been an open book, a well-loved paperback with a worn spine. But this woman beside him, Tiffany, she was a leather-bound edition, locked tight. Her smile was lovely, but it never reached her eyes. And those eyes, they weren't looking at my son with love. They were sweeping across this room with a different purpose. "Please come in, you two," I said, trying to keep my voice warm and natural. "I've just made a pot of Earl Grey." We sat in the living room. Sam was visibly nervous. He kept adjusting the collar of his shirt. Tiffany, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She sat upright in the damask armchair, carrying herself like a visiting queen. She complimented everything, from the Hudson River School landscape painting above the fireplace to the Persian rug under our feet. Her compliments were specific, well-researched, as if she had looked up my home beforehand. "Sam tells me you're an expert in antique art," she said, taking a sip of tea. "That's so admirable. I've always believed that people who can appreciate the value of the past are the ones with the deepest souls." I just smiled. "It's just my work, dear. Everything has its own story." And then, after the small talk had run its course, Sam cleared his throat. He took Tiffany's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Mom," he began, and my heart instinctively tightened. I knew that tone. It was the tone of a major announcement. "There's something important I need to tell you." I set my teacup down, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I'm listening, sweetheart." "Tiffany and I," he hesitated, then took a deep breath. "We're getting married." Silence fell over the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to stop. Married? Sam and Tiffany? How long had they even known each other? I hadn't even heard her name until 15 minutes ago. 1,000 questions swirled in my head, but I forced them down. I looked at Sam, into his eyes, searching for an explanation. He continued, his words rushing out as if he wanted to say it all before I could object. "I know it's a bit sudden, but when it's right, you know? And there's something else." He looked at Tiffany, and she smiled, a gentle but somehow triumphant smile, and then placed a hand on her stomach. "Tiffany's pregnant. We're going to have a baby. You're going to be a grandmother." This second piece of news was even more shocking than the first. A grandmother. The word echoed in my mind like a strange, distant sound. I had always looked forward to this day, the day Sam would have a family of his own, the day this house would once again be filled with the laughter of a child. But not like this. Not with such suspicious haste, and with a woman who I felt had far too much to hide. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth from the fireplace. But I am Eleanor Vance. I have faced down shrewd auctioneers, difficult clients, and the pain of losing the love of my life. I would not let my turmoil show. I took a breath and managed a smile that I hoped looked genuine. "Oh, Sam, Tiffany, this is wonderful news." I stood up and walked over to hug my son. "Congratulations, my dear. I'm so happy for you." Then I turned to Tiffany, placing my hands on her shoulders in a polite embrace. "Welcome to the family." That evening, I insisted they stay for dinner. I felt I needed more time to observe, to listen, to try and understand what was really happening. I decided to use the heirloom silver and the Limoges porcelain plates that Arthur and I had bought on our honeymoon in Paris. I also opened an excellent bottle of Chateau Margaux. If this was a celebration, it had to be done with proper ceremony. And if this was a battle, I also needed to arm myself with my finest weapons. Before going downstairs, I stood in front of my mirror, removed my brooch, and fastened the diamond necklace that Arthur's father had custom-made for his mother. The heart of the Vances. It was a heart-shaped blue diamond, surrounded by smaller white diamonds that sparkled like a constellation. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the symbol of our family, of our legacy, of love and responsibility. Wearing it, I felt stronger, as if the spirits of generations past were standing with me. Dinner began in a somewhat strained atmosphere. Sam tried to bridge the gap, telling funny stories from his childhood about our family vacations. Tiffany listened attentively, letting out a tinkling laugh from time to time. But I noticed that while Sam was lost in his stories, Tiffany's gaze was once again wandering around the dining room. She wasn't just looking, she was reading the room. "This dining set is exquisite, Mrs. Vance," she said, her hand gliding lightly over the mahogany chair. It seemed like a casual gesture, but to me, it felt like a geologist testing a rock sample. "Is it 19th century?" "My husband, Arthur, inherited it," I replied, my voice calm. It's been in the Vance family for generations. To us, it holds more sentimental value than anything else. I deliberately emphasized the words sentimental value, a subtle way to steer the conversation away from dollar signs. But Tiffany didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she chose to ignore it. The insurance on these pieces must be quite expensive, wouldn't you say? She pressed on, her eyes fixed on the china cabinet displaying antique porcelain. Sam quickly interjected, probably sensing the conversation was heading in the wrong direction. My mom is the most careful caretaker in the world. You know, one time I broke a tiny teacup, and Mom was... It was just a teacup, Sam. I cut him off gently, smiling. Things are meant to be used and enjoyed, not sealed away in a glass case forever. I turned to Tiffany. When are you two planning on having the wedding? Oh, in about 4 weeks, Tiffany answered, her bright smile returning. We want to get everything done quickly before my baby bump starts to show. We're looking at a few venues, maybe the Four Seasons or the Museum of Fine Arts. I want a wedding that's truly elegant and memorable. The Museum of Fine Arts, the Four Seasons. The names echoed in my head along with colossal numbers. Sam was a university professor. His salary was good, but there was no way it could cover such an extravagant wedding. I glanced at my son. He was looking at Tiffany with an adoring gaze, as if every word she spoke was gospel. My heart ached. My son wasn't just in love, he was utterly enchanted. The conversation continued, revolving around wedding plans. The honeymoon, Tiffany suggested the Maldives, or Bora Bora, and their future home. I think Beacon Hill would be a wonderful place to raise children, she said. Every suggestion, every dream she uttered, came with a hefty price tag. I felt like I was sitting in on an investment pitch, not a family dinner. And then, the moment I had sensed was coming since she first walked through my door finally arrived. During a lull in the conversation, as Sam was pouring more wine, Tiffany's gaze locked onto my neck. This time, it wasn't a fleeting glance. It was an intense stare, the kind of focus I'd only ever seen in collectors when they spot a piece they desperately covet. "Oh, Mrs. Vance," she breathed, her voice filled with admiration. "That necklace is absolutely breathtaking. It's almost unreal. It must be a Cartier design from the Art Deco period, isn't it?" She was correct about the period, a well-researched, targeted compliment meant to impress. But the way she looked at it, it wasn't the admiration for a work of art's beauty. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey. She didn't see my family story hanging from my neck. She saw carats, cuts, and a number with a long tail of zeros. I instinctively reached up and touched the diamond. It felt cold against my skin. "Thank you, dear. This is the heart of the Vances," I said, my voice as cool as the stone itself. "It's a wedding gift and a legacy passed down to the women of the family." "What a lovely tradition," Tiffany said, her eyes still glued to the necklace. "It's simply perfect." Perfect. That word echoed in my mind long after they had left. The house returned to its usual quiet, but the peace was gone. I stood alone in the dining room, looking at the half-eaten plates. Dinner was over, but I knew, with a sinking feeling, that another chapter, one far more complex and dangerous, had just begun. That night, sleep did not come easily. The image of Tiffany, her calculated smile, and the avaricious glint in her eye as she stared at the heart of the Vances, haunted my thoughts. I tossed and turned in the large bed where Arthur used to lie beside me, feeling more alone than ever. The silence of the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt hollow, a premonition of a loss to come. I am not a mother who worries for no reason. My intuition, honed by decades of dealing with people and precious objects, was screaming a warning I couldn't ignore. Something was terribly wrong here. The next morning, I was awake before dawn. The early mist still clung to the world outside my window, painting the brownstone rooftops of Back Bay in a silvery gray. I skipped my usual routine of reading the Boston Globe and taking a walk in my small garden. Instead, I sat at my desk in the library, the only light coming from the brass desk lamp casting a glow on the polished mahogany. I was surrounded by reference books, auction catalogs, and files on priceless works of art. This was my kingdom, a place where facts and evidence were paramount. And today, I needed to find the facts about Tiffany Rose. I started with what I knew: her name and her profession as a high-end real estate agent. A few online searches brought up a glossy LinkedIn profile and a meticulously curated Instagram page filled with photos at lavish restaurants, five-star resorts, and on sparkling yachts. Everything was designed to project the image of a successful, stylish young woman living a dream life. But to an eye accustomed to seeing past the gilded surface, I saw something else. I saw a constantly changing wardrobe of designer clothes, handbags worth thousands of dollars, and trips that even a successful broker would find difficult to afford so regularly. There was a disconnect between the image she projected and the income she could realistically be making. It's like when I appraise an antique. You don't just look at the surface. You have to turn it over, examine the maker's marks, the scratches of time, the hidden details that only an expert would notice. I needed to look at the underside of Tiffany Rose. I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Julian Croft. Julian is a discreet man, retired after 30 years with a major financial investigation firm that specialized in vetting individuals for corporations before billion-dollar mergers. He owed me a favor from years ago when I helped him recover his father's stolen Patek Philippe watch. "Julian," I said, my voice low and firm, "I need your help with something. It's entirely personal and must be kept in the strictest confidence." I gave Julian the little information I had on Tiffany. He didn't ask why, which is something I've always appreciated about him. He simply said, "Let me see what I can find. I'll call you back, Eleanor." While I waited, I was restless. I went to the gallery but couldn't focus on my work. I stared at a portrait by John Singer Sargent, but my mind was painting another portrait, one of the woman about to enter my son's life. That afternoon, as I was preparing to close up, Sam called. "Mom?" His voice came through the phone, a little hesitant. "Are you free tonight? Tiffany and I would like to take you to dinner. Tiffany said she'd love to get to know our family better." My heart sank. I knew this wasn't a simple invitation. It was a charm offensive, another attempt by Tiffany to solidify her position. But refusing would only push Sam further away. "Of course, dear," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "I'd love that." We met at an elegant French restaurant in the South End. Tiffany wore a silk dress, the color of emeralds, which complemented her blonde hair and blue eyes. She looked radiant, and Sam, sitting beside her, watched her with undisguised adoration. The dinner was perfect, too perfect. Tiffany told amusing stories about her work, she asked thoughtful questions about Sam's childhood, and she listened to me talk about Arthur with an expression of deep empathy. She was a gifted actress. "I truly admire the love you and Arthur shared," she said, placing her hand on mine in a familiar way. "It's what Sam and I hope for. A lasting love, a connected family. That's why this baby is such a wonderful gift. It will bind us all together." Her words were sugar-coated, but to me, they had a bitter aftertaste. She was using the baby, my unborn grandchild, as a tool, an anchor to moor herself to the Vance family. The next day, Julian called back. His voice was serious. "Eleanor, are you sitting down?" "I'm sitting, Julian. What did you find?" Her work history is fairly clean, a few real estate firms, nothing unusual. But her finances, that's another story entirely. He paused for a beat. "She's drowning in debt. I'm talking about a substantial figure. Around $87,500, mostly in high-interest credit card debt and personal loans. Most of her cards are maxed out." I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. The number was staggering. "Is there more?" "There is," Julian continued, his tone growing more concerned. "Her current address is a rental in Cambridge, but she's only been there a few months. Before that, she was living in a luxury penthouse on Commonwealth Avenue. You know the area. The rent there is astronomical. And she was sued and evicted by her landlord 4 months ago for non-payment. She owes nearly $20,000 in back rent. A penthouse, overwhelming debt, an eviction. The picture of Tiffany Rose was coming into focus, and it wasn't pretty. "Thank you so much, Julian. I'm in your debt once again. Just be careful, Eleanor," he said before hanging up. "Desperate people do desperate things." I sat frozen in my office, Julian's words echoing in my head. Desperate people do desperate things. A rushed wedding, a sudden pregnancy, a woman on the brink of financial ruin. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming an alarming picture. Tiffany didn't love Sam, she was hunting him. Sam, with his stable career, respectable family, and wealthy mother, was the perfect lifeboat. He was a solution to all her problems. That evening, I knew I had to talk to Sam. It would be the most difficult conversation of my life. I asked him to come to the house, alone. I made tea, and we sat in the library, the same room where we'd had countless heart-to-heart talks over the years. A fire crackled in the hearth, creating a false sense of coziness. I started gently, asking about his work, about his plans. Then I took a breath and gathered my courage. "Sam, I need to talk to you about Tiffany." Instantly, I saw him tense up. His shoulders stiffened. "What's wrong, Mom?" I have some concerns. I know this isn't easy to hear, but I feel you need to know." I laid out what I had discovered, as calmly and factually as I could. I told him about the massive debt, about the eviction from the penthouse. I didn't make any accusations or judgments. I just presented the facts. I just think that, with getting married and having a child, you need to have a clear financial picture. These are very serious issues. I had expected him to be surprised, maybe worried, but instead, I saw a different emotion cross his face: anger. "You had her investigated?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You had a PI follow my fiancé?" "It wasn't like that, Sam. I was just..." "Just what?" He shot up from his chair, pacing in front of the fireplace. "You can't stand to see me happy, can you? You've always been like this. With every girlfriend I've ever had, you always find some problem, some flaw. This is different, Sam. This isn't about whether she likes to read. This is about deception." My own voice began to tremble. "Deception? Tiffany told me everything." He spun around to face me. "Yes, she had financial trouble. She got into a bad business deal with an ex-boyfriend, a man who used her and left her high and dry. She had to bear the consequences all by herself. She was ashamed of it, and I told her it didn't matter. The past is the past. What I love about Tiffany is her strength, the way she's overcome it all." I was speechless. A perfect story, a story of a poor, tragic victim. Tiffany wasn't just a talented actress, she was a brilliant scriptwriter. She had anticipated my digging and had prepared a narrative to neutralize any information I found. She had turned her weakness into a strength, her debts into proof of her resilience. "Sam, don't you see?" I pleaded. "She's manipulating you." "No," he shouted, and the sound was like a knife in my heart. "The only one trying to manipulate anyone here is you. You've always wanted to control my life. You've been lonely since Dad died, and you don't want to share me with anyone. You're jealous of my happiness." "Jealous," I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. "Sam, you're all I have. Your happiness is the only thing that matters to me." "If you really cared," he said, his voice cold and distant, "you would accept Tiffany and be happy for us. But you didn't do that. You chose to snoop around and try to drive us apart." He walked to the door. "I think it's best if we have some space for a while, until you're ready to be a part of my new family, fully and without judgment." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a silence that was heavier than before. I sank into the armchair, feeling completely drained. The conversation had been a disaster. Not only had I failed to warn my son, but I had pushed him away, straight into the arms of the woman I believed would destroy him. I stared at the dying flames in the fireplace. The logs had burned down to glowing embers. I felt that my relationship with Sam was just like that. Warm and bright for so many years, but now it was growing cold, with only the remnants of a love that was being tested to its absolute limit. The days following that explosive argument with Sam were the longest and heaviest of my life. The silence he imposed on our relationship was more painful than any angry words could ever be. The townhouse, once a home filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cavernous and frighteningly cold. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap with the foolish hope that it was Sam, calling to say he'd had second thoughts, that he was sorry. But he never called. I tried to lose myself in my work at the gallery, seeking comfort in the quiet beauty of my antiques. I rearranged Ming Dynasty vases, polished Victorian silver sets, and reread old letters written in elegant script. These objects, they had survived for centuries, witnessed wars, revolutions, and broken hearts. They held a silent wisdom, seeming to whisper to me that this storm, too, would pass. But the comfort was fragile, because unlike a shattered porcelain vase that can be restored, a mother's heart, when broken by her own son, carries scars that never truly heal. In my loneliness and despair, I almost began to doubt myself. Maybe Sam was right. Maybe I really was a selfish, controlling mother who couldn't accept her son's happiness. Perhaps losing Arthur had left a void so vast that I was unconsciously trying to fill it by clinging to Sam. I questioned myself. I searched my memories. I tried to see things from his perspective. But then, the image of Tiffany's eyes as she stared at the heart of the Vances would return, and a cold certainty would wash over me again. This wasn't a mother's jealousy. This was instinct. The instinct to protect my only child from a predator in sheep's clothing. A week before the planned wedding, while I was at the gallery, my assistant informed me that I had a visitor. She says her name is Tiffany Rose, Mrs. Vance. She says she has an appointment. I had no appointment. My heart began to pound. What was she doing here? Alone, without Sam by her side. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was a confrontation. "Show her into my office," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I sat behind my walnut desk, my hands resting on its surface. My office is my sanctuary, surrounded by books and art that I cherish. It gives me a sense of power and control. I needed that right now. Tiffany walked in. Today, she wasn't wearing a glamorous designer outfit. Instead, she wore a simple, cream-colored knit dress and very light makeup. She looked fragile, almost innocent. A deliberate choice of costume, I knew. A way to position herself as the underdog. But her eyes were anything but weak. They were sharp and full of calculation. "Thank you for seeing me," she began, sitting in the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. The sweet, false demeanor was gone. Her voice was now cool and direct. "I don't believe we had an appointment, Tiffany," I replied, my own voice just as cold. "Oh, I think we do," she said with a smirk. "We have a mutual problem to solve, and that problem is Sam. Sam is not a problem. He is my son." "That's right, and my fiancé, and the father of my child," she retorted, emphasizing each word. "And right now he is miserable because of the rift between the two most important people in his life. I'm here to find a solution, a way to heal this family." I remained silent, waiting. I knew this was just the preamble. "I know you don't like me," she continued, looking me straight in the eye, unflinching. "You investigated me. You think I'm a gold digger, that I'm only with Sam for his money." She let out a small scoff. "You think you know me, but you're wrong. You have no idea what I've been through." She paused, as if expecting a response, but I stayed quiet. I wouldn't fall into the trap of arguing about her past, a past I was sure she had carefully rewritten. When I didn't react, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. The fragile facade began to crack. "But that doesn't matter," she said, her voice hardening. "What matters is the future, Sam's future, my future, and the baby's future. And for there to be a peaceful future, we need a sign of trust, a gesture of your approval." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on my desk. "I want the heart of the Vance's necklace," she said, her voice flat. The words hung in the air between us. They were so brazen, so shameless, that I almost had to laugh. All pretense had been stripped away. This was her endgame. Not the hollow compliments about my antiques, not the touching stories about love. It was this, the blue diamond, the symbol of my family. I took a deep breath. That necklace is a family legacy. It is not something one demands, Tiffany. "Oh, I'm not demanding," she said, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "I'm proposing a solution, a wedding gift. A way for you to show Sam that you truly accept me, that you accept this marriage. Imagine how happy he'll be when he sees you give it to me on our wedding day. All the doubt, all the resentment will be washed away." "My answer is no," I said, my voice firm. "That necklace is not for sale or for trade." Tiffany's smile vanished completely, her blue eyes narrowed, turning as cold as ice. "You're not understanding, Eleanor," she said, using my first name for the first time, a deliberate insult. "This isn't a proposal, it's a condition. And if I don't meet your condition? She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The fragile act was gone, replaced by a ruthless confidence. Then I would be heartbroken, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I would be heartbroken to have to tell Sam a different story, a story about how you asked to meet with me privately today, about how you couldn't accept that I was carrying your grandchild. She paused, letting her words sink in. I would tell him that you offered me a check, a very large one, she continued, her voice as steady as a death sentence, and that you asked me to take care of the pregnancy. A euphemism for an abortion, you understand? I would say that I refused in horror, and that's why you hate me even more. The air in the room grew thick. I felt it was hard to breathe. The cruelty of this plan, its sheer malice, was beyond anything I could have imagined. She didn't just want money. She wanted to destroy me, to destroy my relationship with my son forever. I would cry, she went on, almost as if talking to herself, her eyes fixed on some distant point. I would be devastated. A poor, pregnant woman, treated so cruelly by her future mother-in-law. Who do you think Sam will believe, Mrs. Vance? The mother he already thinks is controlling and jealous, or his pregnant wife who is so deeply hurt that it might affect the baby? She looked at me, and in that moment, I no longer saw a greedy young woman. I saw a monster who knew my exact weak spot and was aiming straight for it. I stood up and walked to the window, turning my back to her. I needed to think. I needed air. The autumn leaves outside seemed to mock the turmoil in my heart. She had calculated everything. It would be her word against mine. And Sam, in his current state, would undoubtedly believe her. I would lose him. I would lose him forever. So, Tiffany's voice came from behind me, pulling me back to reality. What do you think? A dusty old necklace in exchange for your son's love. I think it's a pretty good deal. I turned to face her. The initial shock had passed, replaced by another feeling, a cold, steely resolve. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. She thought I was just a rich, weak old woman who was easily bullied. She didn't know that I had spent my life studying power struggles, the intrigues of royal courts, the strategies hidden in games of chess. She had declared war, and I would never back down when my family's legacy was on the line. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and looked Tiffany straight in the eye. I would not let her see my fear. I would not give her that satisfaction. You need an answer now? I asked, my voice frighteningly calm. My composure seemed to throw her off. Preferably, she said, with a slight hesitation. Then you will have your answer, I said, before the wedding. I stood up and walked to open my office door. Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do. Tiffany rose, a bit unsteadily. She had expected a breakdown, tears, begging. She hadn't gotten it. The disappointment was plain on her face as she walked past me and out the door. After Tiffany left, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over my office. The air still seemed to hold the scent of her expensive perfume and her naked malice. I stood motionless for several minutes, trying to steady my breathing. Tiffany's threat wasn't just a simple blackmail plot. It was a carefully calculated attack on the very foundation of my family, on the sacred bond between me and Sam. She had turned a mother's love into a weapon to be used against me. The cruelty of it both disgusted and infuriated me. The initial trembling subsided, replaced by a chilling clarity. Fear had crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. Tiffany had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated her opponent. She thought I was a lamb to be easily frightened, but she didn't know that my whole life I had learned to think like a wolf. Arthur, my husband, used to say, "Eleanor, you have the mind of a strategist hidden behind the heart of a poet." It was time for the strategist to take over. I couldn't confront Tiffany head-on. It would be my word against hers, and in the drama she had constructed, I was already cast as the villain. I needed something else. I needed a trap designed not just to expose her lies, but to make her expose herself in front of the very person she wanted to deceive the most, Sam. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the library, a cup of long, cold Earl Grey beside me, and I thought. I replayed every detail of my encounters with Tiffany, every word, every gesture, What was her greatest motivation? What was her fatal flaw? The answer was clear: greed. An insatiable, unchecked greed that blinded her to all risks. She craved the heart of the Vances not just for its monetary value, but because it was a symbol of the wealth, status, and acceptance into a world she desperately wanted. That greed was the bait, and I would craft the perfect hook. The next morning, I called Tiffany. I had practiced in the mirror to make my voice sound tired and defeated. "Tiffany, dear," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "It's me, Eleanor." "Yes, Mrs. Vance." Her voice on the other end held a poorly concealed note of triumph. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," I said, managing a heavy sigh. "I don't want to lose Sam. He's all I have." Silence on the other end. I knew she was smiling. "I understand, Tiffany," I continued, as if reading from a mental script. "If that necklace is what it takes to bring peace to this family, if it will make Sam happy, then I'll do it." "A wise decision," she said, the smugness in her voice now undisguised. "All right," I said, "and here is where I cast my line. You'll have the necklace." I paused to let her savor the victory. "But," I added, "there's a small issue. A formality, you understand." "What kind of formality?" Her voice grew wary. "Well, you know, the Vances have some very old-fashioned traditions," I fabricated smoothly. "In my father-in-law's will, there's a very specific clause. Any family heirloom valued at over $100,000, when passed to a new family member, not of bloodline that is, by marriage must be reappraised and authenticated by an independent expert. It's to ensure its value for insurance purposes and to legitimize the transfer of assets." I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. It sounded like a reasonable, even wise, procedure for a wealthy family. "It's just a formality," I continued, my voice reassuring, "to make sure everything is on the up and up. I've already arranged an appointment with the best and most discreet gemologist in Boston. He's an old family friend, very trustworthy. His name is Alistair Collins." I had chosen that name carefully. Alistair Collins. It wasn't too common, but not so unusual as to arouse immediate suspicion. And most importantly, I knew it had a connection to Tiffany's past, a connection that she, in her elation at getting what she wanted, might just overlook. I was banking on her arrogance and her greed. "Alistair Collins," she repeated, as if tasting the name. "I haven't heard of him." "He doesn't advertise," I replied. "His clientele consists of the most prominent families. Discretion is his top priority. The meeting will be at his private office, just the three of us. It will be very quick. After he provides the certificate of authentication, I will officially give the necklace to you." A few seconds of silence stretched on. I held my breath. This was the decisive moment. Would she take the bait? "All right," she finally said, "if it's something that has to be done. When is the meeting?" My heart leaped. She took it. "Tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon. I'll send you the address. You just need to be there on time." "Wonderful," she said, her cheerful tone returning. "I knew you'd come around eventually. We're going to be a happy family, you'll see." "I hope so too, Tiffany," I said, and hung up the phone. Immediately, I made my second crucial call. This time, to a number in Beacon Hill. "Alistair," I said, when the man on the other end picked up. "It's Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor?" Alistair Collins's voice was deep and warm, but I could hear an old sadness in it. What a surprise. It's been a long time. Alistair was not a gemologist. He was a retired architect. More importantly, he was the father of Daniel Collins, a talented young painter I had once sponsored. 3 years ago, Daniel had lost almost everything. He had been conned by a woman who promised to help him stage an exhibition and find investors, only to disappear with his entire life savings. I knew that story, and I knew the woman's name. Tiffany Rose. It had taken me most of the previous day to track down Alistair's contact information. I was betting that a father would never forget the person who destroyed his son's dream. "I know, Alistair. I'm sorry for not keeping in touch," I said, "but I'm not calling to catch up today. I'm calling because I need your help, and I believe it also involves getting a measure of justice for Daniel." I told him the entire story. About Sam, about Tiffany, the pregnancy, the blackmail, and my plan. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Her, Alistair finally said, his voice thick with contempt. It was her. After ruining Daniel, she just went and found another victim. Yes, Alistair. And this time the victim is my son, I said. I've arranged a meeting with her tomorrow, at a place I've rented, which we will stage as your appraisal office. I want you to be there. I want you to confront her. What do you want me to do, Eleanor? I want you to become Alistair Collins, the gemologist, I explained. I will bring the necklace, and while you are appraising it, you will tell Daniel's story. Not as an accusation, but as a casual story about a fraud case you once heard about. We'll see how she reacts. That's a very risky plan, he said. I know, but I have one more ace up my sleeve, I added, and I need your help to play it. I need her to confess. I need undeniable proof. We discussed the details of the plan for nearly an hour. The location, the setup of the room, every line of dialogue, how to handle potential scenarios. Alistair, hesitant at first, was fully on board once he heard the determination in my voice and the chance to get justice for his son. A father's pain resonated with a mother's fear, creating a powerful alliance. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The trap was set. Everything was in place. Greed had blinded Tiffany, making her fail to question the name Alistair Collins, fail to double-check any information. She was walking down a path she thought was paved with gold, not knowing that at the end of it lay not the treasure she expected, but a chasm of truth. The next morning, I woke with an unusual quiet in my mind. The panic of the previous night was gone, as was the vague sense of dread. In its place was a sharp focus, as precise as the cut of a flawless diamond. Just like before a major auction, where millions of dollars could be decided with a single nod, I felt all my senses were heightened. Today, I wasn't bidding on a piece of art. I was bidding for my son's future. The Boston sky was a cruel, clear blue, seemingly unaware of the drama about to unfold below. I chose my outfit with purpose. Not the soft silk dresses I usually wore, but a perfectly tailored charcoal gray tweed suit. It projected power, seriousness, a subtle suit of armor for the battle ahead. I wore minimal makeup, just a swipe of deep red lipstick, the color of determination. Finally, I went to the safe, hidden behind a painting in my library. I turned the familiar numbers, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, the heart of the Vances lay, sparkling coldly under the light. The blue diamond in the center seemed to absorb all light, as deep and mysterious as the ocean. I carefully took out its case, an old leather box worn with time. Holding it, I could feel the weight of generations, of vows, of love, and of sorrows. Today, it would not be a symbol of love, but an instrument of justice. I had rented a space for the appraisal. It wasn't a real office, but a small suite in a historic building in the financial district, a place just grand and discreet enough not to arouse suspicion. I arrived an hour before Alistair to prepare. The room had dark oak-paneled walls, an antique desk, and 2 leather armchairs. I brought a few props from my gallery to add to the authenticity: an antique Tiffany desk lamp, several thick books on gemology, and a professional velvet pad for displaying jewelry. When Alistair arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. He was no longer the sad-faced retired architect. He wore a well-tailored 3-piece suit, his hair was neatly combed, and he wore a pair of round-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly, authoritative air. In his hand, he carried a leather briefcase filled with the tools of a real appraiser: jeweler's loupes of varying magnifications, an ultraviolet lamp, a microscale. He had come prepared. "How do I look, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice low and even. "Do I look like someone who can tell a diamond from a piece of glass?" "You look like much more than that, Alistair," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "You look like you could appraise a person's soul." "That's exactly what we're here to do today," he replied, and my smile vanished. Together, we did a final check of the miniature recording devices that I'd had Julian Croft discreetly install the night before. A camera was hidden in a pen in the pen holder on the desk. Another was nestled in a small Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf. The microphone was integrated into the desk lamp. Everything was ready. We would not just have words, We would have irrefutable evidence. I spoke with Daniel this morning, Alistair said quietly as we waited. He wishes us luck, and he said that, no matter the outcome, he's grateful that someone is finally standing up for him. His words forged a deep connection between us. This was no longer just my story with Sam. It was also Alistair's story with Daniel. We were two parents from different worlds, united by a shared pain and a shared resolve to protect our children. At 3:05, I received a text from Tiffany. "I'm in the lobby." "She's here," I said to Alistair. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his face unreadable. He sat down behind the desk, put a loupe to his eye, and began examining a small stone he had brought with him, completely absorbed in the role of a busy professional. I went to open the door. Tiffany stood there, beaming like a star. She wore a vibrant red silk dress, the color of victory. The smile on her face was radiant and confident. She believed she had already won. She was arriving to collect her prize. "Hello, Eleanor," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. "I'm not late, am I?" "No, you're right on time," I replied, stepping back to let her in. "Please, come in. Mr. Collins is waiting for us." She swept into the room, her eyes immediately scanning the space, assessing its luxury. She nodded with satisfaction, as if everything met her expectations for such a high-stakes meeting. Then her gaze fell upon the desk. "Mr. Collins," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Tiffany Rose. It's a pleasure to meet you." Alistair looked up from his loupe. He slowly took it off, stood up, and took her hand. "Miss Rose, a pleasure," he said, his voice calm. They shook hands, and in that instant, I saw it, a minuscule change in Tiffany's expression. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. A flicker of confusion passed through them, so fast that if you weren't watching closely, you would have missed it. It was the brain's reaction to recognizing something familiar, but being unable to place it. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling her hand back but still staring at Alistair. "You look very familiar. Have we met somewhere before? Perhaps at a real estate event?" She gave a little, nervous laugh, trying to cover her unease. This was the key moment, the moment her perfect world began to show its first crack. Alistair looked at her, a direct, unflinching gaze. He didn't answer her question right away. Instead, he said slowly, "Please have a seat, Miss Rose. Mrs. Vance, if you would." We sat in the two chairs opposite him. I placed the leather case containing the heart of the Vances on the desk between us. Tiffany couldn't take her eyes off it. Greed was quickly overpowering her fleeting suspicion. "So," she said, her voice filled with renewed eagerness, "shall we begin?" Alistair was in no hurry. He put on a pair of white gloves, a gesture of pure professionalism. He opened the box with a sense of ceremony. The blue diamond flashed under the lamplight, breathtakingly beautiful. Even I, who had seen it 1,000 times, had to catch my breath. "A magnificent piece," Alistair said, his voice thoughtful. He picked up the necklace with a pair of specialized tweezers, holding it up to the light. Tiffany leaned forward, her eyes shining. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined." "Indeed," Alistair said, his focus still on the necklace. "Beautiful things can sometimes be dangerous. They can make people do foolish things." He placed the necklace back on the velvet pad, then looked up, directly at Tiffany. This time, there was no polite professionalism in his eyes. There was a cold, judging gaze. "I don't believe we met at a real estate event, Miss Rose," he said, his voice even, but each word landed like a hammer blow. "I believe the last time we saw each other was at my son's art exhibition." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My son," he repeated, "Daniel Collins." The name Daniel Collins landed in the quiet room like a gunshot. I looked at Tiffany. All the color had drained from her face. Her bright red lips parted, but no sound came out. The confidence, the triumphant air, it all vanished in an instant, leaving only raw, naked panic. She looked from Alistair to me, and in those blue eyes, for the first time, I saw fear. She knew. She knew that this was no appraisal. The name Daniel Collins hung in the heavy air of the room, like a verdict that had just been read aloud. The silence stretched for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the bookshelf, each tick like a drop of water counting down the final moments of the fabricated world Tiffany had built. Her face was now a portrait of collapse. The confidence had evaporated like smoke, leaving behind a look of sheer, naked horror. Her wide blue eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were now dazed, like a cornered animal realizing there's no escape. She whipped her head towards me, her eyes accusing and filled with disbelief. What is this?" she stammered, her voice no longer sweet, but thin and reedy. "What is going on, Eleanor?" I looked at her, unflinching. "I believe the appraisal is just getting started, Tiffany," I replied, repeating my earlier sentiment, but this time it carried an entirely different weight. Alistair, the man who had lit the fuse, sat with a terrifying calm. He showed no sign of gloating or anger. His face held only a deep sorrow, the sorrow of a father forced to relive his most painful memory. "3 years ago," he began, his voice steady but laden with the weight of a grief that had never faded, "my son, Daniel, was a promising young painter. He had talent, he had passion, but he was inexperienced and far too trusting. He looked directly at Tiffany, and I saw her flinch. Then he met you," Tiffany rose. "You came to him like an angel. You praised his talent, you promised to help him find investors, to organize an exhibition that could change his entire career." Tiffany began to shake her head frantically, her perfectly styled blonde hair now looking disheveled. "No, I don't know what you're talking about. You're mistaken." "Am I mistaken?" Alistair asked, his voice never raising in volume, but the tension in it ratcheted up. "You appraised my son's talent. You convinced him that to host a major event, he needed to put up matching funds. He believed you. He gathered all his savings, even borrowed from friends. $65,000. He gave it all to you." Alistair paused, taking a deep breath. "And then, a week before the planned exhibition, you disappeared. You vanished with the money, vanished with the promises. You changed your phone number, moved out of your apartment. You vanished into thin air, leaving my son with a broken heart and crushing debt. He had to sell his studio, the place he considered his second home. He gave up on his dream for a very long time." Alistair's story was told simply, without flourish, but its simplicity made it all the more devastating. It wasn't an accusation, it was a testimony. For the first few seconds, Tiffany seemed paralyzed by the truth, but then I saw a shift in her eyes. The initial panic was replaced by something else, a cold calculation. The survival instincts of a professional grifter were kicking in. She realized that a weak denial wouldn't work. She needed a new script, a more convincing performance. And then she burst into tears. They weren't quiet tears. It was a racking, broken sob, full of pain and injustice. She buried her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Oh my God," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe this is happening." She lifted her head, her beautiful face now streaked with tears, her mascara beginning to run. She looked pitiful, wounded. It was a masterful performance. He's lying." She turned to me, her eyes pleading, as if I were her only savior. "Eleanor, don't you see? This is a setup. You set me up." She shot up from her chair, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at Alistair. You're a liar. I know who you are now. You're Daniel's father." Daniel was obsessed with me. He couldn't accept that I rejected him. She began to pace the room, fully immersed in her role as the falsely accused victim. When I told him I only saw him as a friend, he became unhinged. He ran his own business into the ground through his own incompetence and then blamed it all on me. He stalked me. He harassed me. I had to move, change my number just to get away from him. She stopped in front of me, her tear-filled eyes looking at me with anguish. "And now his father is here. Eleanor, what have you done? You found him. You paid him to make up this horrible story, didn't you? All to ruin my wedding, all because you don't want your son to be happy." Her accusations were sharp as daggers. She had skillfully flipped the script, turning herself from the accused into the victim, and me into the malicious mastermind. She was so convincing that, for a brief moment, even I was almost swayed by the manufactured sincerity of her pain. She wasn't just crying, she was living the role. I glanced at Alistair. His face was pale with rage at the blatant lies being thrown at his son, but he maintained his composure. He knew this was exactly what we had anticipated. "A very moving story, Miss Rose," Alistair said, his voice dangerously even. "Do you have any proof of these accusations? Any harassing texts from my son? Any emails? Any witnesses?" "Proof?" She laughed bitterly. "What proof does a terrified woman need? I was too scared to keep anything. I just wanted to forget it all." "How convenient," Alistair said under his breath. I knew it was time. Time to bring the curtain down on this play. "Tiffany," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through her tearful monologue. "I think there's someone who can confirm your story." She turned to look at me, a little wary. "Who?" I didn't answer. Instead, I looked toward the door of an adjoining room, a small study we had prepared. I gave a slight nod. The door opened quietly, and Samuel was standing there. Time seemed to freeze. Sam didn't enter the room right away. He stood in the doorway, his face as white as a sheet. He had been in there the whole time, listening to everything through a discreetly connected sound system. He had heard Alistair's story. He had heard Tiffany's tearful drama, and now he was standing there, his eyes fixed on the woman he loved, the woman carrying his child, and his face was a chaotic mess of pain, disbelief, and utter devastation. Tiffany turned, following my gaze. When she saw Sam, her sobs caught in her throat. Her expression shifted from anguish to absolute horror. "Sam," she whispered, the sound barely a breath. What are you doing here?" It was a foolish question, and she knew it. Sam's appearance was like an electric shock that paralyzed the room. Tiffany stood as if turned to stone, her beautiful face now a shattered mask of horror and disbelief. The fake tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving smudged mascara trails. Her performance as the victim had come to an abrupt end without a final line. "Sam?" she repeated, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. How long have you been here?" Sam didn't answer right away. He walked slowly into the room, each step seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds. He didn't look at me or at Alistair. His eyes were locked on Tiffany, with a look I had never seen in my son before. It wasn't blind adoration or gentle love anymore. It was a hollow, profound confusion, the look of a man who has just realized the very ground he stands on has crumbled beneath him. "I've heard enough," he finally said, his voice hoarse, stripped of its usual warmth. "I heard Mr. Collins's story, and I heard your story, Tiffany." Tiffany rushed towards him, trying to grab his hand. "Sam, you have to believe me. This is a setup. Your mother arranged all of this. She hates me. She wants to drive us apart," she said frantically, desperately repeating the lines from her old script. But this time Sam took a step back, pulling away from her touch. That small act, that physical rejection, was more powerful than any words. It was an invisible wall that had just been erected between them. "Then tell me, Tiffany," Sam said, his voice eerily steady, the calm at the center of a hurricane. "Tell me the truth. Do you know this man? Do you know Daniel Collins?" A heavy silence fell. Tiffany looked at Sam, then at Alistair, then back at me. Her mind was racing, trying to find a new lie, another escape route. But she was out of scripts. All paths were blocked. Seeing her hesitate, Alistair, who had remained silent since Sam's appearance, decided to deliver the final blow. He was no longer just a grieving father. He was now a prosecutor presenting his final piece of evidence. He slowly took a small digital voice recorder from his vest pocket and placed it on the oak desk. "Perhaps this will help you remember, Miss Rose," he said. Tiffany stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. What? What is that?" "This is a voicemail," Alistair explained, his eyes never leaving her. "A message you left for my son's business partner, a man named Mark Finley, 2 days after Daniel went bankrupt. Mark felt terrible about his part in what happened, and he kept it. He gave it to me as a way of making amends." Alistair pressed the play button. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating, and then a voice filled the space from the recorder's small speaker, a voice that was clear, smug, and unmistakable. It was Tiffany's voice. "Mark, it's Tiffany. Listen, just wanted to let you know, it's all done. He was a fool, just like we thought. I got over 60 grand out of that pathetic artist." Consider it an expensive lesson for his naivete. Tell him thanks for funding my startup capital, will you? And don't call me again." The recording ended with a cold little laugh, and then silence. But the sound of it seemed to hang in the room, stripping away every lie, every pretense. It was the final nail in the coffin. A confession from her own lips. I looked at Sam. His face was rigid, ashen. The last traces of doubt in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a painful, unbelievable certainty. He turned to look at Tiffany, and this time, what I saw in his eyes was disgust. The silence in the room was broken. But not by an apology or remorse. It was broken by a scream. "All right!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice sharp with rage and desperation. The final mask had shattered, revealing her true self, a person filled with bitterness and resentment. The cornered animal had finally decided to attack. "Yes, I did it," she yelled at Alistair, no longer crying or pretending to be weak. "Your son is a hack, a delusional dreamer who thought painting a few sad pictures would make him Picasso. He deserved it. This world has no place for weaklings like him." Then she spun towards Sam, the madness in her eyes making me shudder. "And you're no better than he is." She pointed a finger at Sam's face. "A gullible fool. A grown man who needs his mommy to make all his decisions for him. Did you really think I loved you? Did you really think a non-existent pregnancy was a reason to get married?" What? Sam stammered, reeling from one shock after another. "The pregnancy isn't real?" "Of course it's not real, you idiot." Tiffany laughed, a wild, manic sound. "It was the only way to lock down a lonely, desperate man like you. A way to get my foot in the door of your rich family. You swallowed every lie I fed you like a child eating candy." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "And you old witch, you think you're so clever, don't you, staging this whole drama just to expose me? You've ruined everything. She screamed, a raw cry of fury and defeat. In her rage, she had admitted to it all, defrauding Daniel, lying about the pregnancy, her true motives for being with Sam. Everything I had suspected, everything I had feared, was confirmed by her own mouth in the clearest possible terms. The confession was out, not delivered with remorse, but with pure spite. But it was a confession nonetheless. Sam just stood there, as if turned to stone. He heard every word, every accusation, every venomous admission. I could see his world shattering into a million pieces. The love, the trust, the hope for a family, it all went up in the flames of her rage. Tiffany was panting after her outburst, her hair a mess, her face flushed. She looked around the room, from Sam's frozen face to Alistair's stern expression, and finally to me. She must have realized what she had just done. She had burned her own last bridge. In the deafening silence that followed the storm, only one question remained. What happens now? Tiffany's violent rage subsided, leaving a horrifying void in the room. Her cruel confessions, especially the admission that the pregnancy was a lie, had dealt a fatal blow to Samuel. He stood there, trembling not with anger, but with the profound shock of a betrayal that had seeped into his very bones. He looked at her, and in that moment, I watched the last ember of love die, replaced by a painful, hollow emptiness. "The baby wasn't real," Sam repeated, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was the acknowledgement of an undeniable truth. Tiffany, realizing she had gone too far, tried to muster one last bit of composure. Her survival instincts told her she needed to regain some control, however small. She rushed toward Sam again, but this time with a feigned softness, a fabricated remorse. "I'm sorry, Sam," she whispered, and what seemed to be the first genuine tear fell a tear of defeat. "Yes, the pregnancy," I lied. "But it's because I love you so much. I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid you wouldn't marry me without a baby. I was afraid your mother would tear us apart. I did it for love." She tried to take his hand, but Sam decisively pulled it away. Her touch was now a contamination to him. He looked at her, his eyes exhausted by the lies. "I gave you everything, Tiffany," he said, his voice low and heavy with disappointment. "I fought with my mother for you, the woman who loves me more than anyone in this world. I was ready to marry you, to share my life with you, to trust you. And all you did was prey on my loneliness, on my desire for a family. I'm sorry, Sam. I promise I'll change. We can still. Sam cut her off. He looked at Alistair, a look of gratitude and apology. Then he looked at me. In my eyes, he saw pain, but he also saw unconditional, non-judgmental love. Finally, he turned back to Tiffany, and this time, his eyes held a clarity. A decision had been made. I don't even know who you are anymore, Tiffany, he said. Everything I thought I knew was just a well-polished lie. He walked over to me, stood by my side. A simple but deeply meaningful act, a reconnection after weeks of distance. Then he turned back, looked straight at the woman who was almost his bride, the woman who had wrecked his life with deceit. And he said a single word, a word spoken from the very depths of his soul, carrying all his disillusionment, his heartbreak, and his suppressed anger. Get out. It wasn't a shout. It was a cold, final command, carrying the full weight of a relationship's collapse. Tiffany was stunned. She couldn't believe her ears. She had anticipated every reaction except for this absolute, final rejection. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a crazed hatred. She had lost. She had lost spectacularly. She didn't say another word. Her face hardened, replacing the panic with a cold, cruel mask. She turned and stormed out of the room without a backward glance. The sound of her high heels echoed on the marble floor in the hallway, the final sound of chaos before the silence returned. When the door closed, Sam and I stood there, in the now heavy, empty silence of the room. I said nothing. I knew Sam needed time. Alistair Collins was the one to break the silence. He walked over to Sam and put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly, his voice full of understanding. "There is nothing easier than being deceived by someone you love." Sam turned, and I saw tears streaming down his face. They weren't tears for Tiffany, but tears of shame, of foolishness, of the pain of having doubted his own mother. He nodded at Alistair, unable to speak. I walked to Sam. I didn't say anything. I simply wrapped my arms around my son. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I could feel his body shaking. He wasn't just crying for the loss of Tiffany. He was crying for the loss of his own trust, his innocence, the time he had wasted. He was crying because he had pushed away the one person who truly loved him to chase a mirage. "Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with sobs. "I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you." I held him tighter. "It's going to be okay, my love," I whispered in his ear. "It's all going to be okay. You did nothing wrong. You just wanted to be loved. I am always here. I always believed in you, and I always love you." That was our moment of healing. My relationship with Sam had been tested by fire, and it had emerged stronger, more genuine than ever. Trust was reestablished, not with words, but with the brave, though painful, actions of a mother. After he had calmed down, Sam sat, and the three of us, two parents and a newly rescued son, discussed the next steps. Alistair gave me the voice recorder and other evidence related to Daniel's case. He didn't have to ask, but I knew what I had to do. "We won't let her get away with this, Alistair," I said. "She confessed to defrauding Daniel, she blackmailed me, and she deceived my son. I will forward all of this evidence to my lawyers. I will ensure she is held accountable for her actions, not for revenge, but for justice, and to make sure she can never do this to anyone else again." Alistair nodded. "Thank you, Eleanor. That means the world to Daniel." We agreed to keep the matter private for now. Sam needed time to process everything. The wedding, of course, was called off. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp and discreet woman, and informed her of what had transpired. I gave her the recordings and instructed her to file a civil suit for blackmail and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and to prepare a detailed report to be turned over to the police for the fraud investigation. When Alistair left, he and I shook hands, a handshake that lasted a moment longer than necessary. In his eyes, I saw not just gratitude, but respect. We had weathered a storm together. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said. "You've taught me a lesson about a mother's courage." I smiled. "And you have taught me about the power of the truth, Alistair." I took Sam home. He needed to rest. Sitting beside him in my car, I felt an overwhelming exhaustion, but it was a sweet exhaustion. I had lost a battle with my son, but I had won the war for him. The heart of the Vances was still safe in its leather box, untainted by greed. And most importantly, my heart and Sam's heart were mended, stronger than ever. The weeks following that fateful appraisal passed in a meaningful quiet. The storm had passed, but the debris it left behind needed time to be cleared and repaired. Sam moved back in with me for a few weeks, a decision we both implicitly understood was necessary. The brownstone no longer felt cold. It once again became a sanctuary, a safe space where my son could slowly heal his deep emotional wounds. Sam didn't talk much about Tiffany in those early days. He spent most of his time reading in the library, taking long walks along the Charles River, or simply sitting with me in silence, sharing a cup of tea. The silence between us was no longer the strained distance of the previous weeks. It was an understanding, a comfort in knowing that no words were needed to feel the other's presence and support. I didn't push him to talk. I knew he had to process the shock and betrayal on his own terms. My role now was not to analyze or advise, but simply to be a mother, to be there with unconditional love. Gradually, he began to open up. One evening, as we were watching an old Hitchcock film, he suddenly turned to me and said, "I was so blind, wasn't I, Mom?" I placed my hand on his. "You weren't blind, Sam. You just have an open heart. You saw what you wanted to see, a love, a family. That's not a flaw. It's a beautiful thing. You just gave it to the wrong person." "How did you know?" he asked, his voice still holding a trace of doubt in his own judgment. "How could you see through her from the very beginning?" "It's a mother's instinct, my dear," I smiled. "And perhaps the experience of an antiques dealer. I've spent my life distinguishing the authentic from the fake. Sometimes, the forgeries are so exquisitely made, they're almost perfect. But they're always missing something. They lack a soul, a genuine story. Tiffany was the same. She was a perfect copy, but hollow on the inside." That conversation was like a door opening. After that night, Sam began to talk more about his feelings, the anger, the shame, the hurt. He admitted that he had ignored small red flags, little lies, because he wanted so desperately to believe in the love story Tiffany had woven. Voicing those things, admitting his own part in it, was a crucial part of his healing process. While Sam was mending emotionally, my lawyer, Mrs. Henderson, and I were working tirelessly behind the scenes. We had irrefutable proof in our hands, the recording of Tiffany's confession during the appraisal, and more importantly, the original voicemail about the Daniel Collins fraud that Alistair had provided. Mrs. Henderson, a sharp woman with short-cropped silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses, laid out a two-pronged legal strategy. First, we filed a civil suit against Tiffany Rose for intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, and attempted extortion. The suit sought damages for the financial losses Sam had incurred, non-refundable wedding deposits, and for the emotional trauma. Second, and more importantly, we compiled a complete dossier, including both recordings and sworn affidavits from Alistair and me, and delivered it to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, recommending criminal prosecution of Tiffany for financial fraud against Daniel Collins. "We will not let her off the hook, Eleanor," Mrs. Henderson said during one of our meetings. "Her behavior wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. We will hold her accountable." A few weeks later, Tiffany was served. According to her lawyer's communications with Mrs. Henderson, she was completely devastated. The world of luxury she had tried to build on lies was collapsing around her. Facing a civil suit from a well-resourced family and the very real possibility of a criminal indictment, she had nowhere to turn. Tiffany's lawyer reached out to propose an out-of-court settlement. They offered to have Tiffany repay all of the wedding deposits Sam had paid and sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising never to contact or mention the Vance family in any way, in exchange for us dropping the civil suit. I discussed the offer at length with Sam. "What do you think?" I asked him. Pursuing this all the way through a trial could be long and messy. Sam thought for a long moment. "I don't need her money, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "What I want is for her to face what she did to Daniel Collins. That's the real justice here. If dropping our civil suit helps the DA's office focus on the criminal case, then I agree. I just want to close this chapter of my life and leave her behind me." His decision made me incredibly proud. He hadn't let bitterness turn him into someone seeking revenge. He just wanted justice and peace. We agreed to the settlement, with one additional condition. Tiffany had to write a formal letter of apology to Daniel Collins, admitting to her fraudulent actions. It was a symbolic demand, but for Alistair and his son, it meant everything. During this time, my relationship with Alistair blossomed into a close friendship. We met regularly for coffee, took walks in the Boston Public Garden, or visited art galleries together. We talked about everything: art, architecture, our children, the grief of losing a spouse. I found in him a kindred spirit, a kind, intelligent man with a deep capacity for understanding. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench overlooking the swan boats, Alistair received a call from Daniel. When he hung up, he turned to me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a truly radiant smile on his face. "The district attorney's office is officially pressing charges against Tiffany Rose," he said. "And Daniel, he started painting again. He said for the first time in 3 years, he feels like a weight has been lifted. He said he wants to paint a portrait of you, Eleanor." Hearing that, I felt a warm joy spread through my chest. We hadn't just exposed a con artist, we had helped an artist's soul be reborn. A few months later, our lives had found a normal rhythm again, but it was a new, better kind of normal. Sam had moved into his own place, but he visited almost every day. Our bond was closer and more honest than ever, built on a new foundation of mutual trust and respect. One evening, as Sam, Alistair, and I were having dinner at my house, Sam raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, looking at me and Alistair. "To parents, to the people who never give up on us, even when we give up on ourselves, and to new beginnings." We clinked our glasses. The sound of the crystal was clear and bright. Looking at the two important men in my life, I felt a deep sense of peace. Justice was being served, wounds were healing, and from the ashes of deceit, something true and beautiful had grown. A friendship, a mended mother-son relationship, and a restored faith in the truth. Time, like a master restorer, has a way of mending cracks and bringing back the original beauty to things that seemed broken. A year after that fateful appraisal, our lives had found a new harmony, a peaceful melody composed from the somber notes of the past. The criminal case against Tiffany Rose finally reached its conclusion. Faced with undeniable evidence, especially the audio confession and the apology letter she had written to Daniel, Tiffany had no choice but to plead guilty in exchange for a more lenient sentence. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation for fraud, ordered to pay full restitution to Daniel, and assigned community service. It wasn't a harsh prison sentence, but it was an official end to her career as a grifter. Her name was now on a criminal record, a permanent stain that would follow her forever. For us, justice had been served. More importantly, she was no longer a ghost haunting our lives. Sam had truly bounced back, stronger and wiser. The painful betrayal had become an expensive lesson, teaching him the difference between innocence and gullibility, between true love and illusion. He was still a kind, good-hearted man, but now his kindness was protected by a layer of caution and experience. He returned to his teaching with renewed passion, and I often saw him smiling again, genuine smiles, free from any lingering sorrow. One autumn afternoon, much like the one when Tiffany had first entered our lives a year prior, I was at the gallery when Sam stopped by. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a woman about his age, with warm, intelligent eyes and chestnut-brown hair. "Mom," Sam said, his smile bright and easy. "This is Sarah. She's a new colleague in the history department. Sarah, this is my mother, Eleanor." Sarah extended her hand, offering a firm, sincere handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance," she said. "Sam has told me so much about you and this gallery. It's a wonderful space." We talked for nearly an hour. Sarah was intelligent, witty, and had a genuine passion for history. But the most important thing I noticed was the way she looked at Sam. It was a look full of respect, admiration, and an easy, genuine affection. And the way Sam looked back at her was the same. There was no blind infatuation, but a calm, comfortable connection between two people who had found each other. I knew then that my son had finally found someone truly worthy of his heart. But perhaps the biggest change was in my own life. My relationship with Alistair had quietly blossomed. From coffees as confidants, we moved on to concerts at Symphony Hall, drives up to Vermont to see the fall foliage, and cozy dinners together. A shared pain had brought us together, but it was our mutual understanding, respect, and the simple joy of being in each other's company that made us stay. He brought a warmth and laughter to my life that I thought I would never have again after Arthur passed away. The restoration exhibition I had been planning finally opened at my gallery. It was a special evening, featuring works by young Boston artists who had overcome hardships in their careers to continue pursuing their passion. The centerpiece of the exhibit, of course, was Daniel Collins. Daniel had returned with a new vitality. His paintings now possessed not only technical skill, but also a profound emotional depth. Standing in the middle of the gallery, watching guests marvel at his son's work, Alistair turned to me, his eyes moist with tears. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You didn't just save my son, you gave him back his soul." And then, he pulled back a velvet curtain, revealing one final piece, an artwork not listed in the catalog. It was a portrait of me. Daniel had painted me sitting in my library, holding a magnifying glass, my gaze focused on a piece of jewelry on the desk, but he hadn't painted me with the stern look of an expert. He had captured something else. In the eyes he painted, there was wisdom, there was resilience, but there was also a softness, a deep and abiding love. He had painted more than just Eleanor Vance, the gallery owner. He had painted a mother. I stood before the painting, speechless with emotion. Later that evening, after the successful show had ended, Sam, Sarah, Alistair, Daniel, and I all gathered in my office. Sam and Sarah were chatting happily in a corner. Daniel and his father were proudly reflecting on the evening's success. I sat in my familiar armchair, a glass of champagne in my hand. Alistair came and sat beside me. "A wonderful evening," he said. "Yes, it was," I replied, smiling. "An evening of new beginnings." He looked at me, his eyes warm. "Eleanor," he began, a slight hesitation in his voice, "I was thinking, after everything we've been through, would you be interested in writing a new chapter with me?" I looked at him, then around the room. I saw my son, happy. I saw an artist who had rediscovered his passion. I saw a kind, good man opening his heart to me. And I realized that the fight to protect my family's legacy had given me an unexpected gift, a new legacy for my own life. I turned back to Alistair, placing my hand on his. "I would love that, Alistair. I would love that very much." I glanced toward the safe hidden behind the painting. Inside, the heart of the Vances rested, sparkling and secure. But I understood something profound then. A family's true legacy doesn't lie in diamonds or priceless heirlooms. It lies in truth, in integrity, and in a love strong enough to protect one another, even when it means making the most painful decisions. I had saved my son, and in doing so, we had found the true heart of our family together. And that, in the end, was the most important victory of all. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope it resonated with you. It's a comfort to know you're out there, sharing in these moments with me. I hope you'll join me again as we continue to explore the incredible journey we call life.